Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda Barker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Lucas Volini.
Hello.
And today we are talking all about clinical supervision, clinical licensure supervision.
It's a mouthful.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are within the therapy realm, you know that when you first start out as a baby therapist, you have to go through a pretty intense time frame of supervision. You have to kind of work underneath another seasoned therapist. And so we wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about what the benefit is of clinical supervision, how to get the most out of it, but then kind of speaking more towards the supervisors, how to be a really great clinical supervisor. So naturally, I had to bring in
two really great clinical supervisors.
Literally, exactly. We have Karna here. Karna,
Yep.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Karna Boynton. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I came into the field, I graduated in 2006. So I came into the field a while ago, and I have been providing licensure supervision, I think going on 2 years now. Be 2 years coming up. I delayed that process for multiple different reasons, and I'm glad I'm providing it.
And you also are kind of in charge of our supervision program, or what does that role look like for you here at Ellie?
Yep. So I am the director of therapist development, and that role right now looks a lot. My primary focus right now is the clinical supervision program, which it is a mouthful. It's a lot. So essentially my role is I keep track of who's providing supervision here at Ellie. I keep track of basically what kind of supervision they are providing, if it's general supervision or if it's more specialized supervision. And then anytime somebody comes into Ellie unlicensed and they're coming into the outpatient and some in-home, so they're postgraduate, pre-licensed, and they're looking to get their hours through whatever board track they're under, whether it's the LPCC, LMFT, or LICSW. I take a look at essentially kind of who they are, what their track is. I like to know what they're interested in specializing in, although I try to stray away from using the term specialty because we evolve and things change, but I like to know what their interests are. My goal is making sure those matches are compatible and that there's longevity in those matches and that these new individuals coming in get the best supervision they possibly can. So my role is really monitoring all of that. I'm not used to this. And making sure that everything is smooth in terms of the matching process, the ongoing supervision process, all the documentation is done, that we're within the compliance required by the boards, by the state. And moving in that direction. I think internship pieces are going to be falling into place here too. So that will be pre-graduate internship under supervision.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
And you're working closely with Lucas on this too.
Yep.
Yeah, so you talked about kind of a lot of the administrative components. We've had a lot of fun just kind of revisioning what therapist development is going to look like at Ellie Mental Health at large. You know, and not only making sure that people get their required hours, which is typically 8 hours a month to get licensed in 2 years, but to make sure that to be intentional about how those 8 hours are utilized, you know, to give them a pretty balanced developmental experience. And so kind of the three key areas that we've identified as being most seminal to therapist development is practice management, self of therapist, and then like clinical excellence and clinical specialty. So some of the supervision is going to be about the rigors of building and sustaining a caseload, how to retain clients, you know, how to make sure that you're moving them through the therapeutic process at an appropriate pace, and just the day-to-day realities of managing your own practice. And then self-a-therapist is going to be group-based to really dig into who you are as an individual and how that intersects with your professional work, you know, to generate greater integration, because that's going to have a lot to do with longevity and sustainability. And then, of course, supervision that's very clinically focused and case-based, where we're going to be matching people with supervisors that have experience and expertise in the areas you're interested in. So if you're interested in becoming more effective with clinicians or with relationships and marital counseling, couples counseling, we'll set you up with a specialty supervisor who has a lot of experience in that domain. And you can rotate through various specialties in the time that you're in the program. So it's been cool being able to just kind of take a step back, examine the deficiencies of supervision as it exists in a lot of agencies, dream about what we wish our experience would have looked like, and bring it to life.
And then our other guest is Gina Young. This is the second time that you've been on Thrival.
Yes.
Now, let me just give a little bit of an introduction for Gina, because
So nice of you.
I've talked on this podcast before. Specifically, we did an episode on efficiency and clinical documentation. And I remember my very first few weeks as a therapist, I don't know if you guys remember this, but it's like you get slapped in the face with all the DAs you have to write and just figuring out what on earth you're doing. And so for me, coming in as a new therapist, I had been doing other clinical work, other type of social work beforehand, came in and was immediately overwhelmed, was having to write all of these DAs, having to figure out, am I doing the right diagnoses? How am I supposed to be doing this? What information goes into this? And just truly feeling like, did I make a mistake? Oh my gosh, this has been crazy. And then I got matched with my clinical supervisor. I met with Gina, and I kid you not, immediately just felt so much better. It was like she came and sat in my office, and she was like, all right. And I was like, okay, well, so here's all the things that I need to talk to you about, probably nearly in tears, if not already in tears. And Gina just was like, all right, let's walk through this. Let's do this. And I kid you not, best supervisor I have ever had. I was doing supervision with other clinical supervisors before.
Really nice.
Yeah.
That's so kind of you to say.
And I'm not joking. It was like, I needed you, and you were great. And so she brought me through to the finish line of my LICSW, and so
That's so sweet.
I had to have you on here for the clinical supervision piece, because you made me into such a great therapist, Gina.
Oh,
yeah.
Thanks. You were already there, and you're right. Especially for an office. I remember you telling me you had 22 DAs to do. I was like, let's just take it one at a time. It's really, really intense. So I'm so glad that we got to meet each other too. And you were right down the hall from me too, which was really nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's dive in. I know that we talked a little bit about kind of some of the main tenets of the clinical supervision program. Let's talk about kind of what makes a good clinical supervisor. What are some important attributes, important things to be keeping in mind? And maybe if you're listening to this episode and kind of thinking, should I become a board approved supervisor? What's in it for me? What sounds good? Let's kind of start there.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I feel like I move into kind of monologue type storytelling, so cut me off if I'm going too beyond the question.
It's literally what podcasts are for.
See, I've never done this.
Yeah, this is what it's made for. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, here we go. 5 hours later. I had really good supervisory experiences. I can go back and rate from my internship to practicum to pre-licensed, more pre-licensed, remember every single person that supervised me. And what has been amazing for me as a clinician is oftentimes those supervisors will make their way into my therapy. And so I'll sit back with a client and I'll get stuck on something and I'll go, okay, what would Roger do in this situation? What would Margaret do in this situation? What would Kathy do? Right? And then I have the answer. And to me, that's excellent supervision, where you can get 10, 15, almost 20 years down the line and you can still pull in wisdom from a supervisor you had in the past. So that's been my experience. So it's great to hear what a wonderful supervisor, because I see the people on your list already in my head. The spreadsheet is in my head.
Yep.
And I'm like, those lucky ducks. You know?
And a bunch of them just passed their tests too.
Yeah.
And I'm just so excited to see them launch. And like, I'm really, really happy for them.
That's another one is the first supervisee I had that launched. I was almost more excited than when I got licensed and finished all that, which is a long process.
Yeah.
And part of me sits back and go, why did I wait so long to take the course? Why did I put that off? But everything in its time. I provide very, not super specialized in trauma, but a lot of my supervision is trauma informed. And I had to go through the things to become what I hope is a well-versed trauma provider before providing that kind of supervision. So everything in its time, but if I could go back, I think I would have taken the supervision course earlier, maybe got my feet wet a little bit more in terms of supervision, because I love it so much. I love providing that. It's not, to me, I went into it going, this is going to be great. I'm just going to sit with some other professionals. I'm just going to help guide them. No. There's much more to it than that, but it's all super rewarding. And yeah, really great supervision experience, and really wanting to extend that out to those just coming into the field. And I thought to myself too, because here we go, Karna's on a monologue, of, and this is me aging myself. I'm looking at maybe another 20 years in the field here before I'm moving towards retirement. And I thought to myself, trauma-informed is necessity. Everybody coming in has an element of something bad that's happened to them that has left some kind of residue in their life moving forward. And so instead of just providing trauma work and then 20 years, peace out, why don't I help train in the next generation of trauma providers? So that's what drove me.
Yeah, it's like when you invest in a therapist development and you give them the optimal supervisor experience, much of like what Miranda explained in her experience working with Gina. So we get into this profession because we ultimately want to help people. At the end of the day, we want to improve the quality of people's lives. You can do that, of course, directly with your own clients, but when you invest in the development of other therapists, that's an opportunity to touch on every client that therapist will ever see. And when you invest in the development of a growing number of emerging clinicians through supervision, it's like you're able to have such a far more widespread impact on the quality of therapeutic work that consumers get to experience, which plays a huge part in sustaining this industry and profession at large. Like if you're somebody who truly cares about the profession of mental health and you see some deficiencies and you feel compelled to play a part in improving it, investing in becoming a quality supervisor is an excellent way to do that.
For sure.
Lucas, you're talking about legacy.
Yeah.
And that's why I became one, is because I had some good, I had some bad. And I really wanted people to avoid having the bad. Although it was instrumental in getting me to where I was, I'd like people to avoid having the bad. So for me, and Karna's right, I can remember all of my supervisors, and the good and the bad. And they all shaped me into the supervisor I am. And Lucas, you're absolutely right. I think about all of the staff that I supervise right now and all the people that they interact with, and then all the people that they interact with. And it's the way for me to leave the biggest footprint.
Yeah.
Well, so Gina, what's a good supervisor? What's a bad supervisor? You don't need to call names out.
No, I wasn't. I was thinking of attributes. A good supervisor is someone who knows themselves really well. I think that is honestly number one for me, so that their own stuff doesn't get in the way. And somebody who's a good clinician. A good clinician and a good supervisor are not the same. It's a different skill set. And something that I think we've talked about here before too is therapy is so much about the relationship, right? The success of the relationship between the therapist and the client. It's the same for supervisor and supervisee, right? If we're going to make any change or learn from one another, it's about being open and available and trusting, right? And we can't do that if we don't have somebody who doesn't know themselves really well. And so I think that for me is the foundation, and the self-reflection piece. That's really huge. And then from there, the open communication is really big. And being a good communicator, being willing to say hard stuff. I think 80% of our job as therapists is saying hard stuff, and naming hard things. And we have to start in our clinical relationships, right? And with our supervisors and our supervisees. So, yeah.
So bad attributes.
Oversharers, like people who...
Oh, like make it about themselves.
Yes, make it about themselves, or have to tell their own story. Because we can just listen. I think that's one. People who struggle with their own practice management, like Lucas was talking about.
Yeah.
If you're not doing the job, you're not teaching them how to do it either, right? So people who are doing, good documentation and have a clinical voice on paper, because that transfers into the work that you're doing when you're talking about it too. And so DAs are hugely important to me. They're a story, a client story. And so that's something that I emphasize and talk about as well is, what does your clinical voice sound like? It's a snapshot in time for this client, and it needs to be a good representation of what they're going through, right? So I think somebody who really has paperwork down, and has a clear understanding of what they're doing. And the balance, I think that's huge as a supervisor. How am I going to teach anyone about balance, work life, any of that if I don't myself have it, and also share when I'm struggling with it too, because I'm not always 100%, right?
Sure.
And so I think showing vulnerability when it's a teachable moment is really the most important. I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, right?
Yeah.
That's really mine. But in the moments where I can use it for growth and for helping other people understand where they could share with the client and move the relationship forward or impart some learning, let's do it.
Well, you're modeling that.
Right,
for-
100%.
You're embodying it.
100%, yeah.
And you create an
absolutely.
energy in that. It's
Totally.
like what I took away from what Barker was communicating about her experience, especially that one day when you walked in. It's like you walked into a space where somebody was composed. They were calm. They were managing their space, and it's like you needed to enter that space of tranquility because that communicated so much. That first and foremost, it's like they're here they can be present with me right now.
Yep.
I'm not competing with anything else that they have going on. And two, it's like, it's possible for me to get there. It's possible for me to reach a place of being composed and having your own office and caseload in order. Because when you walk into a supervisor's, and I've had this experience with supervisors, it's like I walk into the office, it's like paperwork everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Their office is an absolute mess. They're very clearly stressed and backed up.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like, one, they're not here for me.
No.
And two, it's like, is this going to be the rest of my life? Like, is there no overcoming this
Right.
constant feeling of
Such a
being
good point.
overwhelmed with paperwork? Because that's what it feels like when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
And so there's so much communicated in those things. And I would say too, like when you talk about legacy is important. It's also dangerous depending upon how you look at it. And I would say the supervisors that I struggled with, and again, learn from your bad supervision. Like everyone has bad supervision, and there's value in that if you know how to identify it as bad supervision. And that's why it's so essential to have really good supervision as a reference point.
Yep.
But when you approach supervision from a perspective of legacy that is, I need all of my supervisees to figure out how to be more like me, that's problematic. It's like the legacy you want to leave is you helped all of your supervisees figure out how to become themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be a tricky task, because you need to have humility and you need to be not only okay with the fact that they might be going in different directions from where you settled as a clinician, but that excites you. It's like you nurture that, you support that, and you give them all the permission and space they need to fully become who they're meant to be as a therapist.
I have a question for you too. So how do you balance like client caseload versus supervisee caseload? Like, do you have a max number of supervisees that you see during the week, max number of clients? Like, how do you kind of balance that?
I think that was one of the things that helped me move into providing supervision. And going back to when I decided to take the course and realizing I was getting burnt out on my caseload, and looking at I wanted to remain in the field. I didn't want to retire from the field and end up doing something else, which is fine, but I didn't want that for myself. And burnout can get you there. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do here to balance things out? I'm fortunate enough that I don't need insurance through my job. So I was able to reduce my client hours and up supervision to compensate financially for those pieces. So nothing changed financially in our budget. So that's how I was able to do it. I was able to kind of cut back on the client hours. Otherwise, looking again, I'm thinking of all the individuals here that are providing supervision. A big way I noticed people are balancing that out is by providing group supervision.
Oh,
so
sure.
it's more bang for, I guess, for lack of a better term, more bang for your buck. So you can provide 2 hours of supervision to up to 6 individuals for 2 hours. And so you are providing a lot of supervision to a large portion of people, and it isn't really taxing your time commitment. Some people are able to cut back their hours, go down to half-time or maybe part-time, and then they'll pull in supervision. So that's how I was able to do it. Supervision also, even though it comes with its own challenges, you're not just working with one individual. Well, even in therapy, you're not really just working with one individual. We know that systemically. But you're working with your supervisee, and through your supervisee, you're working with their client. And then if you look at it systemically, you're also working with their system. And so it's different in that it's not like straight therapy. So you have a little bit, I guess how I want to say it is there's a different vibe to supervision than there is straight therapy. And the paperwork's a little different too. I mean, you're really not having to do DAs on your supervisees or anything like that, no treatment plans. So yeah, it helped me to have supervision tie in as a balance in terms of shaking things up and diversifying my career.
Yeah. And keeping you from getting burnt out with clients. And no, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. What about you, Gina?
I work mostly with trauma clients. Karna's right. You can have too many of those. So I do think breaking it up is definitely a part of it for me. But I've always been there's a huge part of me that is always going to be a curious learner. And the best way I learn is through other people's experiences. I love that part of it. And the teacher part of me too, that really loves to share what I've learned, and then I want to hear about what they've learned. So for me, it just gives me a more holistic experience as a therapist to come back around. And I know it's very cliche, but I'm learning just as much from my supervisees about what they're out there doing and trying. And when it lands flat, I'm taking that into consideration, and I'm going to try it a little bit differently, right? And so putting all of that out there into the world, I get that back in lots of different ways, including sharing in their successes and being so excited for them and happy for whatever the future holds for them, and knowing that I've helped equip them with the tools that they need to move forward. But yeah, the curious teacher part of me was never, I've got to figure out something for it all the time, and supervision has really, really helped me fill that, which makes me feel really balanced in the care I'm providing for everybody. So.
There's a vibrancy to it, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like an absolute vibrancy that comes with meeting with my supervisees that I don't...
Yeah.
That isn't the same as meeting with clients. And I remember when I was intern and I was working at an outpatient clinic in DeLand, Florida, at a place called the House Next Door. Buckets, this goes back. And her name was Anne. And Anne always loved to sit with us interns. She always made time to sit with us interns. And she, where interns can sometimes feel like they're low on the totem pole, or, you know, they're not really appreciated. I didn't necessarily feel that way. I think that's just a mindset that sometimes it happens when you're working your way up in the field. And Anne always made us feel important, and that we brought to the table information that was just as much as her experience, just as important as her experience. And she always said, I learned so much from you interns because your education is so different than what I got.
Yeah.
I get educated from you.
Right.
So I want to know what you're learning.
Yeah.
And I want to look that up. And, it was great. And I feel that with my supervisees too. It's like, wait, what was that? What was that technique? Mm-hmm. What was that term? I've never heard that. Tell me more about that. And then going and doing my own research and looking and being like, oh, God, I just learned something so cool. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, how many clients do you both see per week versus the supervisees?
Well, I run a group.
Oh, right. Yep.
Yep. So that, like Karna said, gives me like a bigger impact for 4 hours a week. And I love the group. I don't have a lot of group. I don't run any groups.
4 hours a week?
No, 4 hours a month.
Okay.
So sorry.
I'm like, wait a second. I've got more for you. if you want.
No. I love them all learning from each other too and making their own relationships within the group.
Yeah.
And them all sharing like little parts of themselves and their interests to, they're all giving each other a little bit of something. So I really love that group. And I just don't do enough group work. So that's really where, and then I supervise like one person outside of that. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Karna?
Right now, I provide individual to 3 supervisees. I'm looking at taking on a couple more, and I run 4 hours of group a month.
Okay.
With 6 individuals. So I'm providing 6, 7, 8, 9 people with supervision right now.
Nice.
Give or take. Because I think one I see individually and she's in my group.
Sure.
So 8.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And then my caseload is lower because of my position.
Yep.
I'm working on some other things, so I get the privilege of having a balance that I'm actually legitimately needing right now. And doing stuff like this helps too. You got to diversify.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I see like 10 to 15 clients a week.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Like
Yeah.
every other week looks a little bit different, but 10 to 15.
And you're a supervisor in our community base.
in community based. So I have 12 people that I supervise.
Yes.
And then clinical supervision is outside of that. So I love that I can be, it's why one of the main reasons why I'm here is because I can just, diversify my professional portfolio.
I don't think we talk about how important that is for
I
therapists.
came here for that reason, right? Like I would have stayed at other places, but they were only going to let you be a supervisor.
Yeah.
You could not see clients. And I was like, oh man, if I'm not doing the work while I'm talking about the work, then I don't want to do that. I really think you're missing out. I don't think you get the whole package unless you're doing it all together. And Ellie really offered this really great opportunity to do half and half. And then now to even do more clinical supervision. Yeah. So for me, it's a whole package that I can't really get in a lot of other places.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And if you're a therapist in your golden years who is just so revered and you have that reputation, it's like you can absolutely get away with providing high quality supervision while being inactive with clients.
Yeah.
But like when you're in an agency setting, and you still got vitality to see clients, it sends a very different message to supervisees when, you're just not seeing clients
Right.
because your job doesn't let you. That's problematic.
Well, that's kind of like, even when I was in graduate school or like when I was in undergrad, how much more valuable having professors that were in the field was.
Yeah.
Like, because they know what's going on.
The adjunct professors were always my favorite.
Absolutely.
I was like, you're out here Monday through Friday doing this, and then you're coming here and talking about what you just learned. I'm in. Like, that's the same. That's the exact same for me, too. Yeah. Like, if you're not out in the field doing the work, then I don't want to really learn from you as much. So this really allows that opportunity. Like, I just got trained in CPP. I have no idea what I'm doing in CPP.
Wait, what's CPP?
Child parent psychotherapy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, are you trained in it too?
I was making a really bad 90s song reference that really fell flat. Because, like, what's that? Like, down with OPP? Yeah,
Got
you
it.
know me.
That was great, Karna. I'm sorry I missed it.
That's why Karna got her job.
This is why I'm here. Yeah, right.
Your hair and your background.
Yeah,
your
right.
taste in
Awesome.
music.
Awesome.
I
90s
mean,
jokes.
For
Got
crying
it.
out loud. 90s, 80s, 90s hip hop. Here we go.
Yeah, so I am still learning my new models, and I always want to be a learner, right? So I want my supervisees to know too, like I'm out here doing the same stuff, just in different levels. So yeah.
I was told back when my kids were in hockey, and they're not anymore, just for various reasons. And I was sitting with another, I think he was the grandpa. We worked at Canvas Health as an LADC, and we were chit-chatting.
So like crisis response sort of thing?
Yeah, he was the drug alcohol counselor,
Okay.
one of the drug alcohol counselors there. And he had said that he was preparing for retirement, and he had said that the average career lifespan in the mental health is about 10 to 15 years. And talking about diversifying, because this could be a whole nother podcast, is I really started to feel that. You know, going back a year ago, 2 years ago, I really started to feel like, and again, trauma is, am I going to make it? Like, is this the end? Am I going to make it here to retirement? I don't know that I want to do anything else. Although, you know, barista was sounding really good at that time. Free coffee. Could be the gym teacher off. I was the history teacher, gym teacher on Beavis and Butthead. Just non-stop coffee.
Another reference over Barker's Head.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm loving this. Oh, I got so many more. Yeah, and I doing the supervision really helped.
Yeah.
And then again, like my role is in the therapist development program. It's like, oh, okay, and I'm offering trainings now, and this is really where it's at because the burnout rate is so high.
Yeah.
And to be able to switch it up and do other things really, really helps. And I felt like supervision was the catalyst for me.
I love
For
it.
getting there. I just love it.
So, I'm curious how I want to just like dive into some like tips or some ideas that people can have for, like if they're supervisors. So I'm curious on a couple of different things, like wondering, how you like approach or structure your supervision sessions. Like if there's a certain way, like if you bring things or you expect your supervisees to bring things, and then just general like tips or ideas that you might have for people who are maybe new supervisors, or if they're trying to kind of figure out how to do supervision.
This is a multi-part question.
It is.
Miranda.
Let me give you the A, B, and C of it. Right.
Okay, so I think when you and I first met, I also think the first meeting, I'm going to follow whatever you're putting down, right? Like, I have a set agenda in my mind, but if you're coming in, and you were coming in with a lot of stress.
Coming in hot.
You're coming in hot. And it was like, okay, never mind. Like, it's just about the space and, like, helping her make a plan. And then we got to figure out, like, hey, you bring an agenda. Like, it's on you, right?
Well, and that was how my previous clinical
Right.
supervisors were
Right.
too. They were like, we don't bring an agenda, you bring it. Sort
Yes.
of stuff.
And to me, it's also like, tell me what's been good supervision. Tell me what hasn't been good supervision. Same with a client. Tell me what's been a good therapist, not a good therapist. Like, what's a good fit for you, so that we can try to connect and start to like find the same page to be on. But yeah, supervisees need to come in with an agenda. That's really, really important because I'm there. It's your time, right? And I was going to speak to that too. It's so important. I check my phones. I turn everything off so that I can be present when I'm with my supervisee, because that hour is yours, right? And I want them to feel like I'm not worried about anything else. I'm not checking my phone or doing this other stuff. Like, I'm present for you. And I think that's really, really important. So I think that's my first thing, is make sure you have the time to do this, you know, and the energy as well, right? To like answer questions and to ask, you know, to read about diagnoses and to do some of this learning, right? And to be able to yourself make time to learn about some things that your intern or your supervisee has asked you about, and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea. Let me go ask some people, and I'm going to come back to you with some of the stuff. So truly, I think having the emotional energy and the work time available to you to do it is really key as well. So
Yeah, that rapport Like right away
Yeah,
when you ask
super
that
important.
question, I'm like, build that rapport. And your supervisees are going to bring to you what they can trust you with. And so when you want your supervisee to tell you the whatever you might consider to be really edging that ethical thing, if you want them to be honest with you right up front that something's going down and it could be an ethical issue or is an ethical issue, you want that trust and rapport in existence. And I don't have you ask like what's the agenda, do you bring things in? I really like to prioritize case consultation. I want them to have the space to develop those therapeutic skills. It also allows me to know where their interests are. So if it's somebody that's interested in nutrition and tying nutrition in, which I don't have any experience in at all, then I want to sit there with them and go, okay, how do we get you better trained in this? What are our options for you so that you can progress in this way? Or if it's trauma and they're like, well, I've got these kinds of clients and this is usually what my brain goes to. I'm like, oh, you're kind of falling into the TFCBT realm. Let's figure out how we can get you better trained in that. And so I really value the case consultative pieces. I do like bringing, like in group supervision, I know some of our supervisors are supers. I mean, they really are. What they like to utilize group supervision for topic discussion. I
Sure.
like that too.
Like a book.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
totally.
Totally. Yeah.
I really like that. I like it when I hear that happening. And also balancing that out with who has cases,
Right.
and making sure that there's space for the cases. So that's usually how I kind of go with.
Yeah, and right off of what Karna's saying, figuring out what your supervisee is interested in, bringing them into your network is huge.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about nutrition, I'm going to send you to Sarah. Like she knows all about that. Or somebody that is EMDR trained, or you want to know more, I'm going to tell you to go and talk to them. It's also about who you know, right? And who you can put people in contact with. I think that's huge. Because I can't be an expert on everything, and I don't want to be an expert on everything. But I want you to know the people that I know that are really good at that. And I think those connections are key, not only to help them learn more, but for us to feel connected and keep us afloat, right? Is knowing that there are other people out there that we can learn from if we want to really dive into a particular subject. So.
And you had stated, just that brings to mind when you had said, make sure you have time for this, is building your own network too, and making sure you have a Rolodex.
I know what
Karna,
that means.
you are really aging.
You're not even that old.
You're not. Like that, you are old.
You never had a Rolodex.
You never.
I totally had a Rolodex.
BS.
I had my dad's Rolodex.
Yep. Okay. I have my own mental Rolodex. It's in my phone.
Yeah. Yeah, contacts list.
It's my contact list.
Snap.
Oh, it's the one where you got to bring the little
loved a Rolodex when I
tab
was a
down
kid,
to
though.
the. Did you ever see the ones where you bring the little tab down
yes.
to the initial,
Oh,
like
yeah.
T, and then it opens and it's like
Open.
Thomas and tailgate.
And then you call them on your rotary dial.
Yep. My grandma's
No, you just
rotary
send a
dial.
telegram.
I still can remember how that phone sounds hitting the, it's like got that little bounce in there, rock, that little thing.
Yeah, so unsatisfying hanging up on somebody on a cell phone.
Right,
Yeah.
it's just not.
Yeah.
And
Not the same at
I
all.
would say the
Just
flip phones are some like, wow.
You can only tap glass so hard.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I love that we entered into the realm of clinical supervision.
Yeah.
Glad we did it with the two of you. Definitely a lot more to explore. I think a big one that stands out to me that will be a good continuation of this series is really digging into the fine line between what distinguishes a therapist-client relationship between a supervisee
Yes.
supervisor relationship.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of similarities, a lot of parallel processes, but absolutely
different.
distinctions.
Yeah.
And so that's a tricky one that you figure out along the way. And so I think that'll be a good continuation.
Yeah, we'll have
as
you
we
guys
move
back.
forward.
Yeah.
Awesome.
that.
Well, thank you both so much for joining.
That's it.
Yeah, well, I know. Gina
I got
has
5
to
more
Gina's
hours
gotta
left.
go.
We got 4 more hours on my 5-hour monologue.
I know.
What is happening
I know
here?
Gina has to go off to a clinical
supervise someone.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
That's
timeliness.
important,
We have
too.
to model timeliness.
Yep.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
true.
yeah. That's right.
So-
Yeah, modeling appropriate behavior.
There you go.
Key.
Well, thank you both
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks
and
for
we'll
having
definitely do a
us.
part 2.
Yeah, thank
Totally.
you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely.